Hello everyone and welcome back to another Stratigoy video. We're doing a series of faction previews basically. We've had 4 faction previews and Ryan and I were both very excited to give them a look over. These videos are kind of meant to be quite short, so we'll try to keep them between 20 minutes and 30 minutes. And I think the cool thing is about these videos is that we're going to connect them to the other faction focuses of this week. So you'll get some insights there. Ryan, you've been adding to your 4th edition document, and now you've gathered 34 pages. How many of those pages?
37.
37,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah. How many of those pages are dedicated to the faction focuses?
Well, I mean, it's everything since the article started coming out. But I mean, let's see. Stormcast. Okay, let me look at one that's more fair here. Gits, for example, is like it's only about a page. But of course, with like Stormcast, we've seen some leaked images as well. So that's been also included in
Yeah.
that write up.
Okay.
So
So we're starting off with Stormcast, so that's good. Obviously, we're gonna make some connections with the stuff that we've seen before the faction focus. And also, we want to quickly shout out that we're not gonna preview or review the lore. We're just here for the match play stuff, and then we'll quickly go over the Spearhead stuff as well. Okay, Ryan. So first of all, let's just scroll to the battle traits here. We've seen these before. We quickly talked about them in our previous videos. You can check it out. Check out those videos here. I'm pointing upwards, but you can't see them. You can't see me. Yeah, I think we both thought these were quite boring, right?
yeah, I mean, but Stormcast is kind of known
Yeah,
as being the straightforward faction, let's say, and they do have a lot of complexity with their war scrolls
yeah,
in terms of not that the war scrolls are super complex, but I would say that a hidden battle trait of Stormcast is that they have so many war scrolls that you can like um, it kind of modularly put together to build an army that's more than the sum of its parts, if you will. So the battle traits that we see here, I kind of feel like are just kind of the setting the table a little bit to be able to play with the army. And of course, we'll be getting a new battle tome. This goes without saying, also for Skaven within the first 3 months or so of the edition, um, where I fully expect that they're going to expand everything. You know, like make new battle formations, new artifact choices, new spells, all kinds of stuff like that. So it's only going to get more complex than this, I think.
yeah. I agree. So looking these over, then the Celestial Realm and the Signs of the Storm are basically one ability. You need one to do the other. And it's familiar stuff. So the Celestial Realm allows you to deploy friendly Stormcast Eternal units into reserve, and then with the Signs of the Storm, you can kind of drop them in like Deep Strike, we would say. Now, an interesting thing about this is there's really no change whatsoever about these abilities. So I'm kind of curious that they kept the more Stormcast Eternals in reserve on the battlefield and in reserve. I thought that maybe for simplicity's sake they would possibly allow us to almost go full on Stormcast Eternals in reserve. That would be kind of cool. What do you think about that?
Skaven can do that now, so they're definitely still keeping the idea of null deploying available in the game.
Yeah.
But I guess it's just been a Stormcast thing for so long that it's kind of like the Spearhead box that has Indrasta in it. If I'm not mistaken, Indrasta and the Chariot can't even come onto the battlefield until halfway through the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of have the feeling that that's a story they're trying to tell with Stormcast in general. Is that what often happens? Is there's some amount of army that starts on the battlefield because it's the beginning of a battle, and then those necessary reinforcements come from the heavens.
Yeah.
And if you let everything be in null deploy, it wouldn't feel like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is all for familiar stuff basically. Is there anything you wanna add to this about the deep striking stuff?
Um, Not really. I mean, we still haven't quite seen how all the timing works out in the core rules, what the specific legalese is for, like, for example, say you have a movement phase ability that can be used in your opponent's turn. We just saw this actually with the Night Haunt article from today. Um, that the problem is we don't know if that means it has to be at the beginning of the phase, at the end of the phase, or anywhere in the phase, especially if it's in the enemy's turn. And I know we're talking about that here, but my point is every time I look at one of these rules, I'm reminded before we get the core rules and we see all the legalese that I don't really know the whole situation.
Yeah.
So like there could very well be something here that's listed that to someone who's read the core rules is totally obvious, but to me right now, I'm totally overlooking it. So, and I think timing of different abilities is going to be one of those things. Like combat abilities, we know have to happen before anyone starts fighting, but I don't know if that applies to the shooting phase. I don't know if that applies to the deployment. I have no idea how that works or what the legalese is. So
Yeah.
that's my only like caveat here.
Yeah. Okay. So on to Heaven Sent then. It's a command ability that costs 1 command point, and it's only once per battle, and it has to happen in your movement phase. And this is kind of a wing to the holy commands that Stormcast had. And specifically, I think the one that's called Call for Aid, where you were allowed to, redeploy or actually resummon, I guess, or resurrect a basic Stormcast unit like the Liberators, for example. So it's slightly changed here, where you just get to pick a Stormcast Eternal Infantry or Cavalry unit as long as it has 2 or more models and it's non-unique. You get to set up a replacement unit with half the number of those models, rounding up. So you could even go for Dracoth units, although you could probably only deploy one if you're going MSU. But if you reinforce them, you can redeploy or resummon 2 Dracoths, which is nice.
Yeah, yeah. So the regular Dracoths for sure, I think, and then hopefully the dragons have the monster keyword because that just seems logical. But I could also see a version of reality where they gave them what's it called, cavalry keyword. That would be pretty bad, but it would be pretty strong. So we'll have to wait and see what the Stormdrake Guard's War Scroll says. But that would definitely be the most broken way to do this, I think.
Yeah, I think you'd almost force every Stormcast player to bring 4 dragons then, just to get more value out of this.
I mean, I definitely played with four fulminators often, 2 units of 4. So
Yeah,
even just those coming back halfway, it's only once per game though, right?
yeah,
So yeah, it's only bringing back 2 models.
yeah,
So it is what it is. But it's still stronger than it once was, except the fact that we lost all the rest of the holy commands or whatever. But as you guys mentioned on your great video with Siegfried recently, the one of the articles even said they're toning down all the armies. So if you keep comparing it to what the armies used to be, you're going to end up being disappointed. I still like to mention what it used to be just as a point of reference, but everyone's getting kind of toned down here, I think. And we can talk more about that in another video once we have some more oversight over what's happening to the average faction.
yeah, yeah. And I definitely don't feel, after having seen 6 or 5 armies as battle traits now, that these are weaker than other ones. They're more simplistic, that's for sure, especially the 2 on the left side here. But I don't really feel like it's weak, or it's neuter to the point where it's almost completely unimportant to know these things or to use these things. So I do still think that they really nailed the feeling of the Stormcast here, where, as you said, you have a battle that's raging on, and they call in reinforcements in several ways, with the deep striking and then the returning of a replacement unit, or a summoning of a replacement unit.
Yeah, now we just need lightning elementals and we'll be all ready.
Finally, spread the word, guys.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last battle trait here is a once per turn ability for your army, and it has to happen in your hero phase. It's called their finest hour. That's a nod to the heroic action that we used to have. You get to pick a Stormcast Eternals unit, so it doesn't have to be a hero, so make no mistake here, that has not used his ability this battle. So that's still almost like Finest Star was before that. Is just now a general Stormcast unit and not a hero. For the rest of the turn, so turn, not battle round, add 1 to wound rolls for that unit's combat attacks, and add 1 to save rolls for that unit. So no longer can you add 1 to wound rolls for ranged attacks, if I understand correctly.
Um, Let's see. Yeah, because it's a combat attack. Yeah, but that was it. I guess it did apply to the heroes for their ranged
Yeah,
attacks,
it
but
did.
heroes
Yeah.
didn't have. Yeah, they didn't have that amazing of ranged attacks usually, and a lot of times the guys that had really great output as a hero already had a pretty good to wound roll.
Yeah,
So
I got some very good mileage out of that with of that with that Severed though, so
okay,
that's why
fair
I
enough.
noticed. I like this
Sure.
ability. I like that you can do it on normal units now. Very flavorful.
Yeah, and the rumor is that Mystic Shield, I don't know for a fact if it's just the spearhead version of Mystic Shield, but I think we've seen that at least. And Mystic Shield is a 6+ ward now,
Yeah.
which makes me think that they're keeping their word of not adding too much save stacking. And this is indeed a bit of an outlier. So
Yeah, and that
I'm
makes
okay with
it that more potent, right? Because there's
that.
so little safe stacking going around now.
Yeah. One little tidbit that I wish they would have changed in the description at the top of the box here. It says once per turn, army, your hero phase. I really wish they would have said once per battle round. The reason
Exactly.
being that every time you read turn, you think twice per battle round. And then you have to read the following clause that makes you realize, oh no, this is just once per,
Yep.
every battle round. But that's a tidbit.
Completely agree. Yeah, that would have been cooler. It also would have been cool, to be honest, to allow it in your opponent's hero phase as well. Who cares, right? If it's only for a turn.
Yeah, well, +1 to save. I don't know. I mean, yeah, but I guess it's only one Stormcast unit, one time per Stormcast unit in the game, right? So just like it was before, so you have to keep track of who's used it already.
Yeah.
So that would be. I don't even know if a Stormcast army has 10 units usually when they play a game. I think it's
Oh, I
probably
don't. I
more.
don't actually mean that you have to. You should be able to do it every turn. I should. I mean, I do mean that you don't have to do it in your hero phase, just the hero phase.
Sure, that yeah.
So once
Then
per
they'd have
round in a hero phase.
sure that'd be fine. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So that's the battle traits. You good to
yeah,
move on?
yes.
All right. So let's look at one of the what's it called, battle formations here. Sentinels of the Bleak Citadel. So this is a third battle formation that we've seen. We've seen the two other ones before. So this one is once per turn army as well, any hero phase. So this is how you could word it, for example. You have to target a Ruination Chamber unit, so that's all the new stuff. And that unit gets a 5+ ward for the rest of the turn. I don't actually know what I think about this.
It depends on how much of the more Ruination Chamber stuff is coming out, and we're going to scroll ahead and see in a second. But thus far, I'm not super impressed with the Ruination Chamber
Yeah.
stuff. Or I can't remember if this one has all the Ruination Chamber stuff. We've seen some leaks. Yeah, this
Mm-hmm.
has a little bit maybe, but anyway, in any case, I'm not like super impressed with those units that we've seen thus far. But granted, those are the ones that come in the launch box. And if you look back to what the launch box was in, I think I said this in one of my last videos. If you look back at what the launch box was in Dominion for third edition, a lot of the units that were in there were not the units you ended up seeing on the tables after
Yeah.
the launch box came out.
Mm-hmm.
So, and fun fact, Thunderstrike is keyword is gone. So I would have thought that there would be some kind of, well, Ruination does one thing, Thunderstrike units do another thing. So like essentially the 3.0 new models, but evidently that's gone. So who knows? I don't know what they're doing, but a 5+ ward is good. And right now we have no reason to think that Hammers of Sigmar's 6+ ward save around objectives, subfaction ability is still in the game. So
Mm-hmm.
this is decent, especially for an army that needs to, that was always weak to ward mortal wounds and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Let's move on. So onto Arcana and incantations here. Let's start off with with a very cool prayer, Bless Weapons. So this is a Stormcast classic. You get to pick a Stormcast priest that chants this prayer. Pick a visible friendly Stormcast infantry units, which is interesting. Wholly within 12 inches of them to be the target. Then make a chanting roll of d6. So as you might recall from our previous videos, the way that prayers work now is that priests kind of generate these tokens, I guess, and they keep praying, and you stack a number of those prayer tokens next to them. And then if you want to pop your prayer, depending on how strong you want it to be, you can spend the necessary amount or overcast it, I suppose. and spend more, as you'll see here in a minute, to get a stronger effect. So the effect here has changed from the previous version. So you get to add 1 to the attacks characteristic of the target's melee weapons until the start of your next turn, which is very strong. I remember, Ryan, when we did our video about swords and sights for the Sylvaneth Current Hunters, that your synopsis every time was more attacks is always better than +1 to hit or +1 to wound.
Either attacks or damage, depending on how swingy you're okay with it being. Attacks are better for consistency, and damage is better for high variance. So, high risk, high reward.
Yeah. And the stronger version of this prayer on a 12 plus, which is quite a number, I have to admit. It affects all friendly Stormcast Eternal units wholly within 12 inch of the Chanter. So that's very, very strong. But then 12 inch, wholly within 12 inches, you really need to coordinate your army for that. And 12 of those tokens to spend is a lot.
Yeah, so this brings a couple questions to mind. For example, you have to target an infantry unit, and one of the priests we know that Stormcast has is on a dragon, Ionis. And I don't know. Imagine that he's not anywhere near another Stormcast unit. Can he even attempt this prayer if there's no target that's around? That's another core rules thing, because you need to be doing it every turn to be saving up the points. And by the way, you probably want to use Unleash Spell, whatever it's called, Magical Intervention, in your opponent's turn to be kicking this also off so that you can build it up in your opponent's turn as well. So you get 2 rolls every battle round with this spell if you want to keep trying to get up to 12. And the question is, can it even be chosen to do if you don't have a guy standing around? Technically, you could just do a different prayer if you know a different one, which you would if you have a prayer lore. You could do a different one, which also generates D6 and adds it to your pool. But I'm curious, what if all the prayers needed to target a unit that wasn't around? Because he can't target himself if he's a monster. So these are the kinds of things I have no idea about, but it gets my rules lawyer brain ticking.
Do you think this ability is strong enough to build your list around?
Yeah, what would be cooler is if all of your priests shared the same pool.
Yeah,
then
I was thinking the same thing.
I would be more convinced of it, but the one priest has to get all the way up to 12. I mean, that 12-inch bubble is basically what what's his name again? I'm blanking on the name. The guy that gave the 12-inch bubble, Gareth Steelsoul.
Yeah.
It's a bit like that, just on an aggressive side, but it takes more of an investment. I like the investment mechanic. I think it's cool. It's a little bit of a bummer that it has to go off on its lowest level at a 6, because obviously on your first attempt, you're probably not getting it off. Mm-hmm. But maybe there's some units that have pluses to pray. So maybe if you got a +2 somehow, then it's a 50% chance you get it off on turn 1. Yep. I'm assuming if you had a +1, then that +1 gets added to your dice pool. Like, say you roll a 3, you have a +1 to chant, then I'm assuming you get 4 on your guy, right? Or is it only for the turn that you want this thing to go off? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's not exactly clear exactly how this storing stuff up works, but I have a feeling a +1, which we've seen in other places, would count to your store of prayer points.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really hard to gauge the value of these abilities if you don't know the full rules, right? Yeah,
and obviously Stormcast is an elite army, so adding +1 attack to units that probably also already have multiple attacks has less impact than adding +1 attack to a unit that only has 1 attack.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. On to the units.
Yes, sir.
I'm really hyped about these units, by the way. I think my favorite thing so far has almost always been it's mostly the battle trades, but for Stormcast, it's definitely been the unit focus. So let's take a look at Krondys first. So Krondys is a battle scroll or a unit that I saw on my table quite frequently because my usual opponent loves bringing Krondys. And to be honest, he's never really had great success with him. And now that I'm looking at this war scroll, I'm also still very not impressed. But I actually don't know what you think about it.
I mean, again, we don't know the context.
Yeah, but how many points it is, for example.
Sure. But I've always been a Krondus stan, especially when he could be taken in Cities of Sigmar, Hallowheart. But that's
Yeah.
those days are long gone. Um, I mean, again, hard to know, but the guy does put out some good damage. So I mean, some as we've seen with a lot of War Scrolls, things have gotten nerfed, but like his melee profiles are doing. Let's see, he's doing more. He doesn't have the tail anymore, which is the big kind of nerf that
Mm-hmm.
used to like base its attacks characteristic off of how many models were standing within 3 inches.
Yeah.
But I did the math on it. Basically, if your tail if for it this profile is better if you're standing around only 7 or less models.
Yeah.
If you're standing around a horde, then it would have been better before. But now it's better against, say, just one target. If you're standing and fighting against one hero monster, you're definitely doing better.
Yeah.
Or one infantry unit with small models like elite unit. So I don't know. And +2 to casting is one less than what it used to be. As we should always mention that these guys, even though they do have this passive ability, as you see here, battle damage, which seems to be always 10 or more damage points, that's the only equivalent to a bracket that we have now. And you can see the little skull next to his Apex Maw profile. Um, Usually whatever we see that's on the war scroll, like say that one thing that's getting bracketed now is similar to some version of the bracket that he used to have. There are still two other things on the average war scroll that had a bracket that aren't getting bracketed anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So we can be grateful. That's a certain type of buff, and it definitely makes life a little easier to keep track of everything. So I think something else you'll notice is that the to hit and wound profiles, as we kind of saw in one of the recent articles, for almost every war scroll is basically the same all the way down the melee or the range. In this case, obviously the range and melee are different, but you can see his profile is very similar for the melee weapons, and then it's not as hard to remember what your unit does, which is a nice upgrade, I think. But in general about him, like I like the roar thing he's got down here.
Yeah.
I'm calling it super roar, where it does something
Yeah.
else. Do a countdown real quick just so you
Yeah.
can find it.
3, 2, 1.
Okay, so if we're looking at like the super roar, it says that the enemy unit's affected to turn, but that always made me think, oh well, what comes after the combat phase? Battle shock. Well, of course we don't have battle shock anymore. So then the question is, what is it turning off? If I'm not mistaken, the big thing it's turning off is um, not does redeploy happen at the end of turn? I'm trying to remember when all the redeploys at the end of the movement phase,
Yeah.
right?
End of the movement
What
phase.
what was at the end of the turn? There was one that a big one was it's power through.
Yeah.
Power through. So it's turning off power through. I think that's the only one. Can you think of anything else that gets turned off by this that's not just in the combat phase?
No.
Okay, so maybe I don't know how impactful that is, but it's at least turning things off in the combat phase, so that's something. Um, and then his spell is basically the same as it was before, except that I think they changed one of the different things here. It was lost -1 attack for missile profiles, but at the end of the day, I don't think that's the one you're choosing. Like a lot of missile profiles for like our weight of dice type of things. Maybe if someone had 2 attacks on a big unit, that's nice. Like something like I don't know, Namarti Reavers. But for the most part, that's the only thing he lost on the spell. Its casting value I think went down by 1, but it went down by 1, but he also lost 1 on his plus to casting rolls, and he's still a 2-level wizard, so you can cast his main spell and then cast something else, and he's going to be one of your best wizards in the army probably. So I'm actually a fan. It just depends on his worst or his points cost really. What do you? I mean, you say you're not that impressed by it?
Well, if his point cost is relative to the rest of the book as it is compared to what it is now, like he takes up a fourth of your army. I'm not sure this would cut it for me, to be honest. But I've always had that kind of feeling with Grandis. Like he wants to be a good caster, but he's actually not that impressive. And I do like that his melee weapons are now more dependable, I guess, less swingy, which is nice. And I think in the new edition, especially with these kind of stats, he can put out some hurt, which is something that he almost always failed to do unless he was up against hordes, at least on my table.
Mm.
I I do find it super weird that he has 2 more health than Nagash does.
Yeah, but Nagash has a ward, right?
Yeah, it just
Yeah.
makes so little sense to me. Like
I mean, Nagash is a
Nagash is a
skinny
little god.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know. A dragon's. I mean, there. What do you think Archeon's going to have in terms of a health characteristic?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And also, Mega Gargants probably still have 35 wounds.
Yeah, that's fair.
So,
That's fair. Yeah.
but anyway, I like Krondys. I'm curious to see what Karzai is going to be because thus far with the War Scrolls we've seen, they've kept their promise of trying to make War Scrolls feel like they have different roles in the
Yeah.
army.
Yeah, and I kind of tease it below here. Like, just imagine what his melee focused brother is gonna be like, and I do wonder about that. Like, I find Cronus' profile pretty impressive, melee wise, at least for a casting dragon. So I do really wonder what Cronus is gonna, what Karazai is gonna look like. I do think that he might be actually the better of the two this time around, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
moving on to the one that I'm actually super excited about, uh, Yndrasta, who you never really saw on a table anywhere, even though she had a pretty flavorful profile and ability, and she has an awesome sculpt. It just really didn't come through, right? Through all the other stuff that you could take as Stormcast. But now, well, they really went 200% Monster Slayer on this girl. Um, I can only imagine that she'll be much, much, much more expensive. But we'll see. So Ryan, these are both War Masters, by the way. We just discussed that they would probably never show 2 War Master profiles, but here we are.
You're right. One of the things people haven't said in pretty much any channel I've been watching about War Masters that they have been saying, well, that means they can take a general's size of regiment, so 4 units instead of 3.
Yeah,
But the other thing that I think the War Master is probably going to do is allow you to take any type of unit.
yeah,
They're not going to be locked to specific things. And
yeah.
as someone who wants more list flexibility, an Andrasta that costs 350 points or something like that is definitely cheaper on the War Master kind of like side of things
Mm-hmm.
than some of the other options. And then this could be a way to make sure some of those random units that you don't want to have to take as auxiliary units, that you can bring them in an official regiment, and then you're not hurting on giving someone extra CPs and whatever else that auxiliary units do.
Yeah,
Drops.
yeah. Okay, so let's look at her profile then. Her one ranged attack is pretty good for damage. You're not gonna kill any monster with that, but you might finish one off or hurt them before you hurl into them with your 3d6 charge. I really love her melee weapons though. The Tengavar profile is fine, but the Blade of the High Heavens, good lord. 3 3s, Rend 2, 3 damage for 5 attacks. That's pretty nasty.
Yeah, but then there's the passive rule that doubles the damage.
Exactly. So the passive, the Prime Hunter, is a double the damage characteristic of this unit's Tengavar for attacks that target monsters. So it would actually inflict 8 damage with the ranged attack, right?
Yeah, there's debate about this because it's got the red passive coloring, which is the combat phase.
Oh
But
yeah.
when this was brought up on Vince Venturella's channel, Warhammer Weekly, he said, no, just trust me. I know 100% this is going to work because Vince has read the rules. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he acts like he hasn't read the rules, but Vince has read the rules more than most people because from everything I've come to know, he's kind of on the more beta testing side of things than not.
Mm-hmm.
So I trust what Vince says about that, and that means that yes, the output of the shooting weapon should also be 8 if it goes through. But then again, even if you all attacker, it's 2s minus 2 8, which is amazing. But how many times have we seen one attack at 2s fail?
Yeah.
Right?
Every
Or
time
my
on my Lariel. Every time.
Yeah, I should have said -3 because it gets 1 extra on monsters, and the 8 is only against monsters. And then the question becomes: is it a monster meta? Are we going to start 4th edition with a monster meta, and then she's going to be very needed, or not? Because her function used to be to heal units and bring units back and battle shock proof units and all that kind of thing. But now she is like pretty much just a monster hunter. That's like her thing. And if we're not seeing a lot of monsters, then you know,
Yeah, I guess it depends. I still think she's quite decent, even if you only see one monster or something like per army. She's quite threatening. You really don't want to put your monster up against her, and if there's no monster left to deal with, she can still dish out a lot of hurt, right? So
yeah. You know what this really makes me want to see though is the Celestin Prime's War Scroll.
yeah.
Because he was very similar, and Bastion Carthalos. I think all these will be War Masters,
Hmm.
and they all used to have a 4+ ward save, but now hers has been turned down to a 5+. So I'm curious, but I definitely see fielding Andrasta in a monster meta as a, kind of a must take.
Yeah. Yeah, so she also has on Wings of Brilliance to add one to the number of dice rolled when you're making charge rolls to a maximum of three. So that's probably always going to be three. Though there are some abilities that lower your amount of dice rolls or dice for charge rolls, so that's something. And then Dazzling Radiance, I almost feel like this is an afterthought, but it might not end up being like that. But it just feels so eh. Ignore negative modifiers to the control scores of friendly Stormcast Eternal units while they are wholly within 12 inches of this unit.
Yeah, because we haven't seen much of it. I think what was it the one of the Lumineth models has a -1 to
Yeah, the Cathalar on her spearhead
yeah.
War Scroll has it, and now Lady Olinner has it as well.
Yeah. So if it's common in the game, and considering how few models you have in Stormcast, then I guess it makes sense. But it's
Yeah.
going to be one of those things that doesn't kick in until you start to feel it. You won't know it's happening unless someone's got that kind of tech.
Yeah, honestly, for how cool Indrasa is, I wouldn't have minded if it was more than 12 inches.
Sure.
Maybe even, battlefield wide, just to balance the fact out that if you take her in a non-monster meta, she still has her use.
Yeah, that's also a good question. Is how many bubbles have we seen that are bigger than 12 inches?
Yeah, not a lot.
Yeah. So I think they've been reining that in a bit.
Hmm. Okay. But yeah, the War Scroll, I love it, especially even in a mildly monster-ish meta. I think she'll do some work.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. The Knight Arcanum. So this guy, it kind of surprised me that they chose this War Scroll to show us.
Yeah, he's a Dominion box guy or she whatever, and they it never got any love because it always was anti spells, but it just never made sense to take this over something else.
Hmm.
And now they've really leaned in on the anti endless spell manifestation thing, and you know it's just too slow. I wish it could fly or something, or had some kind of ranged way to interact with those manifestations, but instead it's just kind of a regular Stormcast dude that happens to be good about this. I don't know if you're still going to take it, and it depends on Vince's idea was that you're going to see endless spells all over the table. But remember, those endless spells cost you one of your other options. And remember, with unlimited spells and spell lores, honestly, I see like the Gits have a -1 12-inch, but -1 to hit 12-inch bubble unlimited spell that I'd be tempted to cast with literally every single caster just to have a -1 to hit on every single one of my units.
Yeah.
So when are you casting those free manifestations if you're doing something like
Yeah,
that?
and even if it turns out to be filled with endless spells and manifestations, there's just still the thing of, is that worth bringing this guy for?
Right.
Because at the
Yeah.
end of the day, it's only +1 to his or her banishment rolls. That's not impressive, and her attacks aren't going to cut it either, probably against those manifestations. So I'm like, if this one costs like 150 points or 140 points, do you really want to spend those points on a mildly okay wizard that it has a very slight edge against summoned abilities or manifestations for that matter? So yeah, I mean, if she were to give out a 4+ ward in an aura or something against manifestations, then I could maybe see it happen if it ends up being a thing where there's indeed a lot of spells going around. But as it stands now, I don't really see why you would spend your points on this guy.
Yeah. It really depends on how meta manifestations become. Maybe they wanted to show this one off just to kind of say look, manifestations are a part of the game now, and here's a thing that interacts with it. But realistically, this model always could do it. And I know Honest Wargamer Rob is very excited about this War Scroll, but I'm not there yet. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, I do really, really love her sculpt though. The model's
Yeah, the
amazing.
model's great. It's a
Yeah,
shame that it never got used. I
yeah,
don't know if I've ever seen it on a table.
yeah. Me neither. Or maybe proxied as a knight. What's it called? The knight with the auto unbind.
Arcanum, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Onto the annihilators.
Sorry, I said Arcanum, and that's this one.
Yeah.
I meant in Contour.
Encounter. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. Okay, so the annihilators are still very much what you remember them being. So only 4-inch move, but 3 health, which is also what they had before. I think they retain their 2+ save, which is pretty nice, considering that rent went down across the board, and it's harder to hit them now as well because there's less pluses to hit. Their meteoric hammers aren't super amazing, but I do think that they're still quite a menace against standard-ish units. And that's really something that they could deal with well before, and I still think they probably can now. Then is there anything you want to mention about the melee weapons before we move on to the abilities?
No, that's just a hero profile's worth, and they're elite. We used to call this type of unit a paladin. They got rid of a lot of the paladin units in the army, but um, this is a typical paladin profile. 3 wounds. The 2+ save is amazing because I don't think we're going to see much 2+ anymore. But
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, I really don't want people to underestimate how much of a annoying speed bump that these guys are. Like, even if you don't kill your targets, if you stick him into combat or you drop an in before of a squishier targets, for example, that you want to protect, so not a target, but a squishier ally unit or a unit in your army at least. These take a while to chew through. I
oh,
played a game with Nagash against these guys, and not only did they deal a ton of damage to him, which was very annoying and got me really riled up, but I also needed 2 turns to deal with these. Amazingly, the God of Death could not deal with 3 annihilators in 1 turn.
yeah, 2+ save is brutal. So
Really brutal.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, the big thing that they changed about them, though, that we haven't seen the contrast with the Grandhammer's version of the unit, but GW is clearly stepping it up with defining the roles here because they have a more defensive position here. I imagine the Blazing Impact rule on the right is going to stay the same for Grandhammer version, that version, but this brace for impact is clearly a defensive stance that these guys take that won't be on the War Scroll for the Grandhammer version. Because if they roll a dice for each model in the unit, and if any of them are 6, the unit that charged them has strike last, which is pretty awesome considering they're probably going to kill at least some amount of that unit, just given how decent they are. And then even if they were attacked, this is the counter argument maybe. Even if they were attacked with a 2+ save, they probably wouldn't have lost too many of the annihilators. But how much of a difference would that have made against Nagash if they gave him strike last, or you know, anyone else that's a vampire lord and zombie dragon? You can bracket the guy maybe. Even the new version of bracketing.
Yeah,
Um,
you also got to keep in mind that combat ranges is now always 3 inches, so you could very easily have a stronger melee unit right behind these guys and then tag them with the strike last and then hit them with the unit behind.
that's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, the blazing impact thing is changed a little bit, where you pick it used to be any amount of units that were
Yeah.
within. The main thing that's really different here, though, for me, is the question that they lost reroll charges when they drop.
Yeah.
And so that was huge. And there's also the power pair with a Lord Imperatant who gave them +2 to charge. So, or no, sorry, he brought them in at 7 inches, so it
Exactly.
functionally was +2 to charge. We don't know if he's still giving that, and we don't know if Blazing Impact will be the same for the Grandhammer version. But that was definitely how you guaranteed those guys got into combat. I
Yeah.
think with a reroll on a 7-inch charge, it was around an 83% chance of hitting it, which for my money is that's like rolling a 2 up. I would take that bet any day.
Mhm.
So we'll have to see what they do. But I'm happy to see that GW has made these guys feel different from what the other ones probably will be.
Yeah, and even if you don't make the charge, you don't necessarily want them to get in the char in a unit anyway per se.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. This unit.
yeah.
Yeah.
This specific unit. Yeah, yeah. Maybe
Yeah.
the annihilators with grand hammers get a reroll to charge, right?
Um. Yeah, maybe. But if it's the exact same word rules text, it won't be because I think they're, for example, like Avalinor and the regular Spirit of the Mountain. I have a feeling there's some of those rules will be printed on both of
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
them.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing.
Okay. So the word from the studio, I think we can probably skip, right? Because
Yeah.
is basically what we're doing now.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you wanted to say something about the Spearhead War Scrolls, Ryan. Do
We
you
can just
just
look at
want
the
to move on to the prosecutors, or
Yeah, definitely. Let's
yeah?
just look at the war scrolls, and we actually have seen a leaked version of the regular prosecutors anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I can just quickly tell you what's different about them.
Yep.
The attack profile and then the like stats wheel is exactly the same, and then the 2 inch coherency range, which used to be 3, but maybe the wings are less obnoxious than they once were because these are new models, is the same. But as you see here, they've got a when you make a charge roll, you one additional dice. That's also on there. But on the official war scroll, it says to a maximum of 3. So I wonder why they didn't just include that on the Spearhead war scroll.
Mm.
And then the only other thing they actually have um, well, this isn't true. The melee weapon has +1 to damage on the charge on the official version of the game, the full version of the game, which makes them the same profile as the annihilators you just saw. 3 attacks, threes, minus 1, 2, which is pretty great. And then the big difference that you're trading off here, of course, is the ruination. The ruination once per turn, ruination chamber 4+ ability ignore. It's not a spell ignore anymore. And then that this spearhead war scroll comes back. Like it's got the reinforcements rule, which is that little recycling symbol in the upper right hand corner.
Yeah.
So people are pretty psyched about prosecutors, and I'm happy to see that they're actually a pretty solid unit that can basically fly across the whole table, go hit something real hard, and actually stick around decently with a 3-up save. Yes, it's only 2 health per model, but if you strike first with them, considering it's like a turn when you're probably alphaing your opponent with just this unit, say it's a block of 6 and all of them get to fight, you're probably clearing some stuff, you know? So I think it's actually a decent attempt at making this model valid. The unit has had a problem being valid since maybe first edition.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
so
I think you'll see these units at least once taken, or maybe even twice, because you always need faster units in your army at some point, right? Look at a Lumineth list. We run 3 or 2 Dawn Rider units just to get the fast moving stuff out there for the missions where you need it. And it's really nice if your fast unit is also actually pretty survivable with a 3+ save and also deals quite reliable damage with a good charge roll.
100%. And remember, on the turn that you send them in, you could have finest houred them. So then they're on a 2+ save with 3s, 2s, -1, 2 damage. Not bad, right? So pretty impressive for that. You just blow that turn on that unit and then send something else and send it in waves, you know?
Yep. Yeah, looks good. I'm hyped. I love that they made new prosecutors good.
And I like the models just fine. They look good.
Yeah, they're awesome. Everyone, thank you so much for listening and watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you're curious to hear our insights on the other faction focuses, we're gradually uploading them now. So you'll probably get a review of every faction focus on the weekends, or at least the ones that we're psyched about. So if you're looking for more info on the other faction focuses, you can click on the right in the playlist and then have a look there. And we'll see you there. Bye-bye.